this basic need to the people, this is something which is going to severely affect economic growth. And here I would just give you a comparison of where we are in terms of world standards. The per capita consumption average of the world is somewhere around 2,000 units per capita per year. Now that is a significant gap that exists between us as well as the rest of the world, and we need to catch up. What is the kind of power infrastructure that we have in this country? At present, these are figures of March 2008. The total generating capacity is somewhere around 1.43 lakh megawatt, and largely it is driven by coal-based thermal generation, almost 65% of it. We have about 25% hydro and some share of renewables and nuclear energy. Now another thing which I will, if you see the bottom line which I have written, that there is a captive generating capacity of somewhere around 14,000 megawatt. Now this is a very important number that exists, and something that we need to somehow encourage them to get into the grid system, given that all of us working in this electricity sector are faced with perpetual problems of shortages of power. There are outages ranging from 4 hours to 6 hours depending upon where we are in this country. So this is a potential area where we can, through appropriate acts, regulatory framework and policies, try to get these captive units which are existing in virtually every corner of this country into the supply system. And I will briefly talk about it in the second session when I discuss utility-driven demand-side management. Now this is the sectoral breakup of the generating capacity, and you see state still has a lion's share of generating capacity, while center's share is increasing steadily. I'm sure you all are aware that central government came into the generating sector only as late as 1975, when companies like NTPC, NHPC, etc. were created. And the share is probably going to increase, given that states do not have that kind of resources. I'm talking about most of the states do not have that kind of resources which are required to increase the capacity generation. Similarly, private sector is a very important player in this whole scenario, and that is why if you recall the basic tenet at which I started off with is that we need a set of policies, a set of regulatory regime which could quickly change this distribution sector so that it becomes attractive for private sector players to come in and invest money, because governments have limited resources, because governments have a social responsibility to undertake, and this is a purely commercial area which needs to be taken up by the private sector. Why it is not happening is the fact that the distribution sector is losing heavily. The losses, combined losses of all utilities in the year 2006 and 7 is estimated to somewhere around 20,000 crores. Now this is a huge dampener as far as any private sector investment is concerned. So there is a need at all levels, starting from the center, to come out with appropriate policies, appropriate regulatory environment, to see that there is the leakages of revenues at the distribution sector is reduced to a bare minimum. Now this is another slide which traces our generation right from 1947. There has been an impressive growth from a little over 1300 megawatt in 1947. We have reached somewhere around 1.43 lakh megawatt now, and we hope to achieve 2.24 lakh megawatt by the end of this 10th plan, and this is a very ambitious target. We have never achieved in a plan period more than 20 to 22,000 megawatt, and what we are trying to do is 78,000 megawatts in this plan. It is ambitious. I know this is something which cannot happen without the involvement of all of you, the entire power sector, but the central government is reasonably confident that this time we will deliver. And in the first year of this plan, which is 2007-8, almost 10,000 megawatt of fresh capacity has already been added. This gives us a sense of pride, it gives us a sense of enthusiasm that yes, we may be able to turn around at least on the supply side. Now what are the measures which are being taken by the central government to improve power availability? Now, as I mentioned, there is a need to tackle this problem at all levels. We have shortages of around 16% during peak hours, almost 10% during off-peak and general. So, which means we have to not only increase our generating capacity, we have to use the electricity supplied more efficiently. And more importantly, we need to tackle the issue of aggregate transmission and commercial losses. The current estimates of the Central Electricity Authority and the Power Finance Corporation indicate that the aggregate technical and commercial losses in the country are somewhere in the vicinity of 34%, which means for every 10 units which is put in the supply system, the utilities, the distribution sector, after the consumers get only about 6.5 units. Now that is a major leakage, and which has a ripple effect on virtually everything: the quality of supply, the resource endowments of the distribution sector, and which affects the future capacity generation. And that is why I said the state governments have been limited by the fact that they do not have enough resources due to the losses in the distribution sector to add new generating capacity. And that is why there is a need for a higher investments from the central government as well as from the private sector. So, what are the steps which the central government is taking to improve power availability? The first, of course, is improved generation. The second is accelerated capacity addition. Now, you might be wondering what is the difference between the first two bullets. I mean, they sound, but they look quite the same. However, it is not. And I will show this in the next slide, but I'll just give you a flavor of it. Improved generation means increase in the plant load factor of the existing plants. Now, you will be surprised, and you may have this knowledge or not, I'm not sure, but the plant load factor in India of thermal plants as a national average is touching close to 80%, and it is amongst the highest in the world. Now this shows, and this has risen very significantly in the last 5 to 6 years. In 2001 and 2, the plant load factor average at the national level was somewhere around 66%. So in a matter of 6 years, we have been able to raise the generation from those existing plants by almost 12%. Now that is a very, very significant development as far as efficiency in power plants is concerned. And this is one reason that despite the fact that in the 10th plan, we could add only 50% of what we wanted to, that is our target was 40,000 megawatt, we could add just over 21,000 megawatt, and still the power situation is not as bad as it could have been had we not improved our generation performance. The second, of course, is what I talked about, is accelerated capacity addition. And as I mentioned, in this 5 years, we intend to install something in the vicinity of 80,000 megawatt, which has never happened in any 5 years, as I mentioned earlier as well. But we are reasonably confident, as I mentioned, to achieve this very challenging task. And here, each one of us will have to work very, very hard to ensure that we deliver on the promises made to the citizens of this country. Of course, when you add generating capacity, you need to develop transmission networks, because unless there is a wheeling of electricity, it will probably not serve the intended purpose. That is one. Number two, the load centers and places where you can have cheap generation are not usually the same. For instance, the entire hydro capacity is in the northeast part of the country, Jammu Kashmir, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, whereas your load centers are much far away. For example, Delhi, all other metro cities, Bombay, for all the SEZs which are coming up at various places in the country. So you need an access of electricity through the transmission network. So there is a need to augment our national grid and therefore transmission network development is also a very important part of the overall power sector the enhancement. And then you cannot overemphasize the fact that you need a tremendous amount of improvement in distribution sector. I mean, nothing is enough as far as distribution is concerned. And there are various problems associated with it, whether it is a question of old equipments, whether it is a question of power theft, whether it is a question of bundling or unbundling of the state electricity boards. A whole lot of set of complicated issues are there which need to be tackled. And the central government, as you may be aware, has already taken a very, very proactive step in this direction. The APDRP scheme has been under implementation for quite a while. And just to give you a brief recount of APDRP, this started off in the year 2000 as Accelerated Power Development Program, where central assistance was provided to the states to upgrade their distribution network. Now the scheme started off in 2000, as I mentioned. However, in 2002, a need was felt to also include something which is now called the incentive component. So APDP was rechristened as APDRP, which meant Accelerated Power Development and Reforms Program. And this tried to incentivize the states by giving them an incentive by way of a pure grant, untied grant for reduction of commercial losses. And this has been quite successful, as I will touch upon in later slides. Then another very important area is improving access in rural areas. Now, as you are all aware, being in the utilities as in various positions, there is a universal service obligation which is attached to the electricity sector. That the distribution company, the state utility or the state electricity board, as the case may be, has to strive to provide access to electricity to all, non-discriminatory. And of course, rural electrification is a significant part of it. And therefore, once again, the center has come out with a very ambitious scheme of providing electricity access to the rural areas of the country under the Rajiv Gandhi Gramin Vidyutikaran Yojana. This is a scheme which was launched in 2004 initially. It has undergone some changes for the better, and right now it is almost on a mission mode where 1.25 lakh unelectrified villages are being taken up for accelerated electrification. And again, I'll touch upon this in some detail given the kind of time that I have in my later slides. And of course, as I mentioned, energy conservation and demand side management. This is something that can complement our efforts in the distribution sector. Because remember, we are talking about under demand side management, conserving electricity at the consumption end, which means if I save 10 units of electricity and I probably do not need to generate 20 units of electricity at the generating end. If you take note of the fact that there are transmission losses, there are distribution losses, and so on and so forth. So this is also something which is very, very important, and it is something where the utilities need to play a very proactive role. I was just referring to in my earlier discussion on the first bullet about the improved generating performance, and these are the facts and figures and the numbers which are put out here for you to see for sure. If you see in 1980-81, the energy shortage was around 12.6%, and our PLF, the plant load factor, was only 44.2. We have not added very significant capacity in terms of, if you compare that with the growth of economy in the same period. Our economy has grown at an average rate of about 7% in this period, whereas our electricity generation has grown only at about 4 to 5%. So our capacities have not increased, yet the energy shortage in 2007-8 is only at 9.9. I'm not saying it is very good, but the fact remains that that in spite of not having the kind of capacity which is required, we were still able to manage the shortages reasonably well, I would say. And that the reason is, as I mentioned, our plant load factor, which is the bottom right figure that is indicated, has almost doubled from 44 to 78.61, almost, I said. And again, I will reiterate, this is amongst the highest plant load factor achieved by any country in the world. So this is something which is quite significant, and that is where the optimism of the central government stems from, that the sector has enormous potential. It's only a question of putting together the right kind of environment to unlock this sector. Yes, having said that, if you see the middle line, which is the peak deficit, yes, this is something which is slightly difficult, and it is directly related to the kind of capacities that are installed at the present time, and this shows you that this is something which is increasing quite tremendously, particularly in 6, 7 and 7, 8. It has gone up from 13.8% to almost 17%. And obviously, the lack of new capacity is one of the major reasons for it. Now, this is the generation performance growth over a period of time. And during the last year, there has been some improvement, but as I mentioned, the main reason for our continued performance as far as not getting the energy shortages out of hand has been an increase of PLF. Now, this is what the central government is trying to do to increase to improve the investment climate. I say, and as I mentioned, there is a need to involve private sector investments in the sector, and and given the fact that the generation sector has reasonably well defined policies, regulations, and legal environment, so it is easier for the government to encourage private sector participation in generation. And as I mentioned, and as I mentioned earlier, that we are targeting capacity addition of somewhere around 80,000 megawatt, and we are still optimistic despite the fact that we have never achieved anything beyond 25,000 megawatt in a 5-year period. The reason for this optimism is that at present almost 40,000 megawatt of generating capacity is already under execution. Now, this is a significant number and a step, which means that we have done our homework, we have done what was required to put the projects in place, the contracts in place, and we hope that these 40,000 megawatt would surely and certainly be installed in the next 2 years. Of course, public sector investments have been stepped up at the central government level, and there is a need to encourage the state governments as well to invest in new capacities. To improve the investment climate, 100% FDI foreign direct investments have been allowed in all the segments of power sector. And just to share this information, that power is one of the sectors which was delicensed as far as FDI is concerned, along with the unshackling of the Indian economy in 1991. And it is since then that 100% foreign direct investment is allowed in power sector. And to encourage a market in this sector, power trading has also been covered under 100% FDI. And of course, when you're talking about improving investment climate, there needs to be a level playing field for domestic and international investors, because otherwise there is always a fear of non-tariff barriers, always a fear of there will be a non-competitive market in the country. So there is a need, as I mentioned, the acts and policies therefore play a very significant role in improving the investment climate in this country, and that is something which is evolving in the right direction to take this sector towards a market-based sector which can automatically provide the best kind of services. Before I come into the Electricity Acts and policies, I would like to just take you back about 20 years ago and try and make a similarities between two sectors, both infrastructure, both pretty much the same, at least in late 80s and early 90s. The first is the telecom sector, which I'm sure all of you would have realized how difficult it was to get a telephone connection. This was not too far away. It is very much in our lifetime. This was early 90s, and the waiting list used to be for tens of years. There was hardly a telephone around anywhere. What has happened to the sector now? And how did it happen? Again, going back to mid-90s, the call rates were enormous. Today, we are the fastest growing telecom market in the world. And just look back on the electricity sector. Early 90s, the shortages, as I showed you in the earlier slides, were quite manageable. They were not as much. But what has happened over the last 20 years or so is that the situation has not really improved in a manner in which it was required. So what is the main key difference at the global level? I mean, it is not that the telecom sector is vastly different in terms of distribution, in terms of billing, in terms of commercial issues, in terms of theft. But how did the government manage to create a sector which is vibrant, which is growing at a growth rate of almost 30%, where now the public sector investments are probably less than what the private sector is investing. There are acquisitions and mergers of billions of dollars happening in the sector. There is a new value-added services which are coming up every now and then. The reason why I'm emphasizing this, and I'm giving you this background before I get on to the Electricity Acts and policies, is that the government was successfully able to create a market for telecom. And by creating a market means creating a suitable investment climate, a non-discriminatory level playing field for all investors, and therefore it is the market forces that come into being, and the supply-demand mismatch is taken care of by private initiative, and therefore all the government requires is to be like an umpire, a neutral umpire, and the sector grows on itself. What is needed in the electricity sector is a replication of this best practice from the telecom sector, and it is not. Nothing yet is lost in the electricity sector. So therefore, the Electricity Act and all the related policies which have been put out during the last 3 to 4 years are aimed to create similar kind of market forces which could take this sector forward in a manner which I just mentioned. Now, Electricity Act, as all of you know, was enacted in 2003. It creates a liberal and a transparent framework for power development. It facilitates investments by creating competitive environment, and reform of distribution sector is a priority area enlisted in the Act. Then, a very significant thing which the Electricity Act 2003 did is to de-license generation. Earlier, if you recall, if you wanted to set up any generating capacity, approval of the central government and Central Electricity Authority was required. This has been done away with, except for in certain categories of interstate hydroelectric projects where there are issues beyond the power sector of sharing of water, etc., etc. Only those category of generating plants now need a license from the government. Captive generation, and I mentioned about this in my opening remarks, that captive generation is a resource which is existing, and this Act again frees up the entire captive sector, and they can have a group captive generating plant. By group captive I mean, in an industrial area there are 10 or 15 industries, and they decide to pool in resources and set up a captive plant for those 5 to 10 industries. That is legally allowed. Another very important thing is recognizing trading as an independent activity. Now, just to give you a brief flavor and a background of it, the Power Trading Corporation was set up as a joint venture of various public sector undertakings in 1998. And it did start trading of power. However, this was not under any legal framework which was then governed by the Electricity Act of 1948. And therefore, there is a need under the Electricity Act 2003 to have trading as an independent activity, because there is a need to regulate this. There are shortages, there are demands, there are surpluses at different points in time in different parts of the country. And trading is a natural phenomenon because electricity cannot be stored. So, in order to regulate the kind of trading margins that a trader can take, it was necessary to put this under the legal framework. Otherwise, it could happen, because as you are aware, the electricity generation as well as transmission is a monopolistic exercise, whether it is in the private domain or in the public sector domain. And there is a need to regulate the amount of profits that you can derive from such monopolistic activities. And therefore, trading has been put into place. And the last bullet in this point, which is a very, very significant step, is to have open access in transmission as well as in distribution. Now, this is something which is very close to what, in fact, it is actually what the telecom sector offers. You have a choice of operator. You are not limited to the fact that you will only choose Vodafone or Airtel or MTNL or BSNL. It is the consumer's choice to choose his service provider. This is something which has been now recognized as a legal activity in the Electricity Act. However, as I go on, I will talk about the fact there are some problems associated with it. These things I have already mentioned, the first 2 points. And when you talk about open access in distribution, what you need is multiple licensees in the distribution sector. And the Electricity Act allows this as something which is possible, which means that in your own home, you have a choice. For example, if you're staying in Delhi, and there are essentially 3 service providers, which is the NDMC, which is a central government utility, you have the BSES and the Tata's NDPL. Theoretically, it has not happened till now, but theoretically, sometimes in future, staying in Delhi may have a choice to choose between the 3. And once you give the consumers this choice, because consumers have the power of the market to create a market, obviously you built in competition between these 3 service providers, and you will start getting value-added services. You will start getting improved services, because because the supplier knows that the consumer has the right to refuse. And only then, once you have this non-discriminatory multiple licensees in a distribution area, can you talk about a creation of an actual market in this sector. Another very significant thing which started off in 1998 by the enactment of the Regulatory Commissions Act, and I will not talk about this because that act no longer exists, it is now part of the Electricity Act, is that regulatory commissions were created both at the central level as well as at the state levels. This is an important transitory step forward, because as I mentioned, in a monopolistic market, which is electricity, which is even telecom for that matter, you need to protect consumers' rights by a quasi-judicial and open public process, and regulatory commissions are doing just that. There are public hearings, there are open hearings where the consumers are free to provide their inputs, and the regulatory commissions takes all those inputs while deciding to fix tariffs. Now what has been done, this is only a slide which is meant to be for record. Most of the rules have been framed. The Act required the central government to announce national electricity policy, which it has done. There is a need to put in place appellate tribunal. As I mentioned, regulatory environment is a quasi-judicial environment, and therefore there is a need to, there will be disputes, and there is a need for redressal of disputes. Therefore, a specialized tribunal has been operationalized in July 2005, where all the appeals of the orders of the various regulatory commissions, whether by the utility or by the consumers, can be taken up in the electricity tribunal. Another very significant thing to create a market has been the competitive bidding guidelines, which were notified in January 2005. And I'll just pause here for a moment, and you may have heard about the ultra mega power projects which have been talked about for the last 1 or 2 years. What this competitive bidding guidelines do is that they create an environment where any any utility can source power at the most competitive rates. And this is precisely what has been demonstrated by the success of the first 2 or 3 ultra mega power projects. What has happened there is that a site was selected which was about 4,000 megawatt. All initial clearances were done by a special purpose vehicle created by the Power Finance Corporation, and then this project was bid out globally. And what did we get in the end is something which is quite revealing. The bidding criteria was solely what is the tariff that the bidder would provide to the government or to the utilities in the long run. And I'm sure you are aware of it. If you're not, this is something which you need to remember, that the first ultra mega power project, which was successfully bid by Reliance, offered a tariff of ₹1.19 for 25 years. Now this is something which is the first step in creation of a market. And just let me this number may not give you enough the thing, but the average cost of NTPC tariff, average cost of power, or the tariff that NTPC charges, given that it has plants which are 30 years old, which are almost depreciated value, is ₹1.70. And here we are talking about a new plant for next 25 years will charge you only ₹1.90. So therefore, competitive bidding, tariff-based competitive bidding is a very, very important policy tool which needs to be encouraged to get the best and the most attractive price, because you can spur competition, and the moment you spur competition, you get the best out of the market. Then regional power committees, which is a requirement of the Electricity Act, has been notified. The electricity and the tariff policies have been notified. And then, as I indicated, Open access is something, another step for creation of market. The Central Regulatory Commissions notified open access and transmission in January 2004. Also, private investment in transmission was allowed since April 2006. Now, transmission sector is, under the Act, is divided into two broad frameworks. The first is a regulatory requirement of transmission, which is the central transmission utility or the state transmission utility, because it has to regulate the flow of electricity. The second part is just carriage. So carriage part, private investment is required, required to take the investments in different areas. This is something which I have already mentioned, so I will not talk about it any more. But the key point is that the inter-regional transmission capacities by 2012 should rise to 37,000 megawatt, which means power through the country up to 37,000 megawatt can be transferred from one region to another. This is also very important given the fact that we are talking about power trading, we are talking about a market-based power trading. So this is something which the electricity policy lays down and is under process by the central utility, which is the power grid. The other thing which electricity policy talks about is saving by demand side management, energy efficiency of about 15%, and this I will talk about in the next session as well. I will briefly touch upon the tariff policy. As I mentioned, the tariffs of all generation and transmission projects in the private sector should be through the competitive route. This is again something which we have to push, something which needs to be taken up to ensure that the monopolistic behavior of the sector is moderated to the extent it should. It also says that public sector to also come out through competitive bidding after a transition period. The second important point, I am sure you are aware of the cross-subsidy regime in the power sector. So there is a need, the tariff policy lays down that there needs to be a reduction in cross-subsidy in the next 5 years. And of course, the regulatory commission should facilitate open access, non-discriminatory open access and distribution. The other important point of tariff policy is the transmission tariff. As you are aware, transmission tariff today in the country is insensitive to distance. Now this is something which is not a very good thing, because if there are, for a transmission line, there are 4 states who are paying the wheeling charges, and the difference, the physical difference between 2 states is 1,000 kilometers, and therefore the state which is farther away should pay more, because it is because of that state that the most of the cost of investment is taking place. So the tariff policy talks about a transmission framework which is sensitive to distance and direction. And of course, strict implementation to performance standards is something which it talks about. Agriculture tariff, something which I will talk about in the next session, is necessary to leverage sustainable use of groundwater resources. These two are linked. The fact that we have zero or low tariffs is all right in the short run, but it takes away the fact that the groundwater resources are being depleted at a very fast pace. I think I'll stop here. Yeah.
So this was a very interesting and informative session by the Shri Saurabh Kumar. Discussed about the Electricity Act 2003 and the various aspects of the tariff policy in detail. So friends, we will again be in discussion after 15 minutes. And now just there is an announcement. So while giving your exam in June, and while giving the exam, just keep your iCard with you, IGNOU iCard, and if you have not received that, get it from the regional center and get your hall ticket. If you have not received the hall ticket, then you can get it from the net, and you can go to the home page of the IGNOU, and from there the hall ticket is there. You will put your enrollment number and get hall ticket printed. And regarding the paper, this will be the theory paper of 100 marks each. There will be 3 papers as per your curriculum, and the short questions and a long question. Basically the short questions of 2 marks, and the 6 marks question will be in the examination. Okay, so we will be in again discussion after 15 minutes. Thank you.